Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Andrew Missick, and today we're going to look at and examine the connections between the ancient Jewish sect of the Essenes and Syriac Aramaic Christianity.
Jesus was an Aramaic-speaking Jew of the Middle East, and the Assyrians are Aramaic-speaking Christians in the Middle East who have endured persecution for over 1,000 years. Join Voice of the Word Aramaic Bible teacher, artist, and author Stephen Missick as he examines the Bible through the ancient languages, peoples, lands, cultures, and times in which it was first revealed. Research the Scriptures, rescue persecuted Christians, and restore the Church to its Semitic roots. And now, Voice of the Word.
When we are exploring the Jewish roots of Christianity, it's important for us to consult ancient Jewish literature from the time of the origins of Christianity. And these texts are called Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha. And of course, there is also a very important discovery in the late 1940s, the scrolls found at Qumran, the so-called Dead Sea Scrolls, which were manuscripts dated to 200 BC to about 70 AD. Many biblical manuscripts were discovered. There's also a lot of manuscripts of texts that we would consider extra-canonical, but that were used as scripture by this community. Some other apocryphal texts, and also what's called sectarian documents, like the basically doctrinal statements and rules of order for this particular sect of Judaism. And scholars have supposed that this sect that produced the Dead Sea Scrolls were the Essenes, because Josephus and other ancient authorities, and ancient historians, contemporaries of that time, described there being three sects in Judaism: the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. But this is actually a subject of disagreement and debate. Some scholars have looked at the amount of scrolls found in Qumran and theorized that perhaps this isn't the library of a monastic community of Essenes, but rather perhaps is the temple library. And that would make a lot of sense to me, except for the fact that we do find this sectarian literature. And this literature, like I said, describes a community that doesn't really match how the ancients described the Essenes. And in fact, if you look at their theology, they seem to be closer to the Sadducees than how the Essenes are described. Perhaps the situation at that time was more diverse. For instance, if you look at, if you say there's three major sects of Christianity: Catholic, Protestant, and Eastern Orthodox, and that's true, but I mean there's a lot of diversity within the Protestant denominations. Some of them are very close to the Catholic Church, and some of them are very, very different. And even the Catholic Church, you have different orders, but you also have different, like the Unite churches, Eastern churches that are affiliated with Rome but maintain their own customs. And even the Orthodox churches. I mean, we look at it as the Orthodox, but if you look at the Coptic Orthodox Church and the Greek Orthodox Church, there's a lot of big differences, and they have serious doctrinal disagreements. But to someone outsider, it looks much the same. So the situation is much more complex than many people suppose. So there are some similarities between the Qumran community and the Essenes, but there seem to be a lot more similarities between the Qumran community and the Sadducees. Be that as it may, I think what we should do, instead of giving a group a label, we should let them use the label they gave themselves. And the community which produced the sectarian documents found on the Dead Sea Scrolls called themselves the Yahad. So, as I was mentioning earlier, you want to explore the Jewish roots of the faith, you need to consult Pseudepigrapha. And this is Charles Worth. There's two volumes. And I happen to have volume 2 here. Volume 1 includes some important texts such as Enoch. This includes a lot of text translated from the Aramaic language and Syriac language. Joseph and Asenath, I believe that's preserved in Syriac, Aramaic. What else do we have here? Ahikar. Some of these books are written in Greek or in, I don't think we have that many written in Hebrew. Well, maybe the Book of Jubilees, which is preserved probably mostly in Ethiopic, which is a Semitic language related to Hebrew. We have the sentences, the Syriac Menander, more Psalms of David. That's what I want to look at. We also have the Psalms of Solomon, and then we have the Odes of Solomon. And what I want to look at today is some of the Psalms, the Syriac Psalms. In the Syriac Bible, there's, our Bibles, the book of Psalm ends at Psalm 150. The Syriac Bible goes to 155. And scholars are like, where did these, these extra Psalms come from? Maybe somebody just made them up and stuck them in there. But then they were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that shows us these weren't Psalms that were just made up and added to the Syriac, the Aramaic Bible later. That these Psalms date to the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Not later additions, but in ancient lost texts. So these Psalms that someone thought were apocryphal are attested among the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I was looking at the commentary, and I found this is very important and very interesting. This is Psalms 154, and let's read the psalm, and then we're going to go back and look at the introduction. I'm going to look at something else, and then we'll conclude. This is Psalm 154. This is from the Hebrew. Of course, it's also in Syriac. It's the fragmentary in Hebrew, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. In Cave 11, the two caves with the most scrolls, I think it's Cave 4 and Cave 11, had a lot of scrolls found in them. So let's continue. Associate yourself with the good ones and with the pure ones to glorify the Most High. I was talking to somebody about this earlier, or probably the last message I gave from these Psalms. Bad company corrupts good manners. Of course, we want to reach out and help people, but we have to be careful about who we associate with so we're not influenced for ill, right? The company you keep is important. It says here, join an assembly to announce his salvation. Do not be lax to announce his power and his gloriousness to all the simple ones. This is the one I read last program. I don't want to read most of it again. You can find that on my YouTube channel, The Lost Psalms of the Bible. For to announce the glory or honor of the Lord, wisdom is given, to recount his mighty deeds, he was made known to humanity. Notice in the Psalms, wisdom is personified as a woman, and this is a very pronounced motif in Jewish wisdom literature. Wisdom personified as a wise woman. To announce the simple ones is power, to explain those lacking understanding is greatness, those far from her openings, those banished from her entrances. So this is Psalm 151. I'm not going to read the whole thing since I read it last time, but I want to read this introduction, which I think is very important. The original language of the psalm is Hebrew, even though it's preserved fully in Aramaic. The original language is Hebrew. The Syriac derives directly from the Hebrew, but not necessarily from the Hebrew that is preserved among the Dead Sea Scrolls, 11 QPS. Because the psalm is preserved in this first century manuscript, it must date from the first or even better, the 2nd century BC, or older than that, possibly. There's no reason to doubt that this was composed somewhere in Palestine. Obviously, it originates from Palestine. It wasn't written in. Of course, the Syriac Peshitta Bible originates in Mesopotamia, but this psalm was not written in Mesopotamia. It was written in the Holy Land. Of Psalms 151 to 155, this one is the most closely aligned to the thoughts of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Interesting, right? The many of 154:1, it's only in Syriac. The Hebrew is lost because the manuscripts decay. May parallel to the many, a technical term, rabbim, that defines the fully initiated members of the Qumran community. See 1QS 6, 8 through 7, through 7 through 25. I'm not sure. That might be the community rule or the Damascus document. I'm not sure. The quote many, however, may be only a generic reference since it is in 155:10 and Isaiah 53:11. The Hebrew 154:4, which has been translated join an assembly, could be rendered join a Yahad. Remember, the Dead Sea Scroll community called themselves the Yahad. The latter is a technical term at Qumran for the community of oneness and the covenant with God. 1QH 11:10 through 14. And there's another references given. I'm familiar with the community rule of Damascus documents and all that, but I'm not sure they're coded, with first the number is the cave they're discovered in, Q for Qumran, and then you have the number given that document found in that particular cave. The phrase join or form a yahad, however, is not found elsewhere in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Other nouns are technical terms of Qumran, but not necessarily ideas peculiar to Dead Sea Scrolls, are the innocent ones. Okay, so there's another phrase which is used among the Dead Sea Scrolls, but perhaps not a unique term they use, but however, it is used among this community. In 154.3, 118, that's 1 Qumran S 422, ideas expressed in 154.10 that the Most High accepts praise as equal to sacrifice, and 154.13 that the righteous share common meals and constantly study the law. But these phrases are also characteristic of the prophets and practices of other Jews, especially the Pharisees. It seems, therefore, that while there is nothing particularly Qumranian about Psalm 154, it may be Proto-Essenian and predate the exodus of the Essenes to Qumran. So what that means basically is this psalm might have been a psalm produced by the Dead Sea Scroll community, the Yahad, or a proto-group that they originated from. So that's very interesting to find a psalm associated with community, the Yahad, that produced the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Syriac Peshitta Bible. So that's very significant that we find links between the Essenes, or the sect that's associated with the Essenes called Yahad, the Yahad, and the Dead Sea Scrolls community. I also want to mention the Odes of Solomon, which is, I want to go over some quick points. It's translated here. It's also in Aramaic. And it's apparently a late 1st century Jewish Christian hymn book. That's what it seems to be. And I'll look at some of the reasons for that. Even if it's dated, some people, I think the evidence points to the Odes of Solomon being around 70 to 100 AD. But some might suppose perhaps it was later, perhaps it's the 2nd century, but still it's very ancient. And to my knowledge, it's the oldest hymn book that has been discovered. And there's a group that set a lot of these. Very interesting. I think it's a 2 CD collection of a group that set the Syriac. They translate in English, of course. They set the Odes and Psalms to music, and as a whole hymn book. It's kind of an amazing project and a way to connect with the 1st century church. So let's look at some points here about the Odes of Solomon. The Odes of Solomon are a collection of 42 odes, or hymns really, attributed to Solomon, but it's written as a Jewish Christian hymn book. It overtly refers to the Word, Jesus being it refers to Jesus Christ pretty overtly. So it's a early 1st century, even though it's called the Songs of Solomon, it's obviously a 1st century hymn book. The odes are generally dated either to the 1st century or the 2nd century, although a few scholars have suggested a later date, but I think the preponderance of evidence goes to the earlier date. The original language of the odes is thought to be either Greek or Syriac, and the majority of scholars believe it to be written by a Christian, likely a convert from the Essene community, or the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Yahad community, to Christianity, because it contains multiple similarities to writings found in Qumran. Isn't that amazing? So we see that with the Syriac Psalms, but we also see it with the Odes of Solomon. Some have suggested the writer may have personally seen the Apostle John. A minority suggests a Gnostic origin, but this is not widely supported. Like I said, there's a lot of Johannine language, and that's very possible. If the Odes of Solomon was written around, let's see, the year 70 to 80, John was still alive, right? The Gospel of John was being written around the same time. Although earlier scholars thought the odes were originally written in Greek or Hebrew, and there is now a consensus that Syriac Aramaic was the original language. And that's significant, right? That we still have Aramaic Syriac Christians to this day. Very ancient community established by Thomas and Thaddeus. I think the traditions of that origin are true, and this is collaborating evidence. Their place of origin seems to have been the region of Syria, probably around Edessa. Estimates the date of the composition range to the 1st or the 3rd century, with some settling on the 2nd century. Some have claimed, this is the interesting thing, some have claimed that Ode 4 discusses the closing of the temple at Leontopolis in Egypt, which would date this writing this year 73 AD. So if you read Psalm, 04, it seems to be referring to the closing of the temple of Yahweh at Leontopolis. And what had happened is you had the high priest Oneas, or Honi, very beloved high priest, but he was deposed. And a lot of this happened during the time of the Greek oppression of the Jewish people and the Maccabean revolt. So this high priest was deposed and exiled, and he went to Egypt, and his descendants say, hey, we're the real high priest. These corrupt, paganizers and false priests usurped our authority. We're the true high priest. So they just went and opened a new temple of Yahweh in Egypt, which was used by the Egyptian Jewish community for some time. But after the temple of Jerusalem was destroyed, the Romans also did, I guess they're afraid that perhaps the Jewish revolutionary spirit would move from being centered in the temple of Jerusalem to the temple of Yahweh in Leontopolis, so they closed it around 73 AD. Why would, it seems like an obscure thing, not that many people know that this happened. So if this psalm refers to the closing of the temple of Leontopolis, which it obviously does, why would someone write about that 30, 40, 50, or 100 years later when it's such an obscure historical incident, which I think dates the document right there. One of the strongest arguments for an early date is the discovery of references to, or perhaps quotations from, the odes of Solomon in the writings of St. Ignatius of Antioch. And he's writing around 100 to 112, I think. He's the bishop of Antioch. He wrote epistles and was martyred in the Colosseum. Possible allusions are also made by Justin Martyr, who died around, I think, 140, 150 time frame. And Irenaeus, which also supports an early date. So you had John the Apostle. He was the mentor of Polycarp, and Polycarp was the mentor of Irenaeus, if I remember correctly. So these are very early apostolic fathers, which also supports an early date. The odes have clear similarities to the Gospel of John, which is overt if you read it. It uses a lot of Johannine language or phraseology found in the Gospel of John, which suggests the author was in the same community, the Johannine community, as where the book was made. There's also wide agreement the odes related to the Gospel of John and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Thus, Charlesworth is the translator here, he concludes the writer was an Essene convert to the Johannine community. So just the concepts from the Essene community, right? So Qumran is closed at 70 AD, and the person who wrote the Odes of Solomon has a background from the Qumran community. Probably most of the people are massacred. That community was destroyed and dispersed. I doubt there'd be any survivors 20, 30 years later. So if this is somebody that survived the Qumran community, this has to be pretty early. So 70 AD, somebody from that community, which was crushed by or repressed by the Romans in 70 AD, and then he refers to an event, an obscure, to us, obscure, an important event in his time, but a very obscure historical event. Not that many people even know there's a Temple of Yahweh, or there's actually two. Earlier you had the Temple of Yahweh at Elephantine. Then you had the Temple of Yahweh at Leontopolis. This is an obscure historical fact not that many people know about, is referred to. So the reference to the closing of the Temple of Yahweh at Leontopolis and the presence of ideas from the Yahad community from Judea, the Dead Sea Scrolls community, that these ideas are found or influenced or found in Odes of Solomon. So you have an early Jewish Christian hymn book, which has the author was apparently from the Qumran community. So that's very significant. And like I said, there's a lot of people interested in exploring the Jewish roots of the faith. And a lot of times they start looking at what Rashi says or what the Talmud says or modern Jewish practices. And it's like, well, we have a lot of important evidence of the Jewish roots of Christianity in these documents. Think about that. A Jewish Christian, a Jew from the first century, somebody who could have known the Apostle John, possibly, wrote a hymn book for us that's been preserved. I think that's very significant. And I think that people who are interested in exploring the Semitic roots of the faith should take a look at this. And this past Sabbath, we had Robert Farrell. And Robert Farrell, he has this channel called The Apocryphal, and he talks a lot about apocryphal text. And he happened to be talking about the Gospel of Thomas. And I want to do a teaching about the Gospel of Thomas. My feeling is it's early, but it's got a lot of statements. I think it's very significant that I think we have an independent line of preservation of many of the sayings of Jesus that are found in the Gospel of Thomas. So we have sayings of Jesus, a lot of them in the Gospel of Thomas, that are also found in our 4 Gospels. Then we have things that sound like something Jesus would have said, and there's a lot of mysterious statements in there. And some of them are parabolic or riddles or metaphorical, but they look very perplexing and even offensive, certain statements. If you read them on face value, they're not meant to be written in face value. It's possible that you had an early sayings gospel that later on was altered by different hands. It's still an important document. So what I am saying is we have our authoritative books, the Old and New Testament, but these apocryphal texts, I think, and the pseudepigramal texts are very, very important, especially these extra psalms found in the Syriac Bible, an Aramaic Bible, a Bible in the language Jesus spoke, but also, a hymn book that's obviously based to the internal evidence of it and the historical context was from the 1st century. So it's an important way for us to get in touch with the church of the 1st century and with our Jewish roots and connect with the Aramaic Christian heritage.
Research, rescue, and restore. Help Voice of the Word and Aramaic Christian Ministries mission research the ancient languages, peoples, lands, cultures, and times of the Bible. Rescue persecuted Assyrian Christians in the Middle East and restore Christianity to its original Semitic roots. For Stephen Missick's books, online giving, and other resources from Aramaic Christian Ministries, visit www.stephenmissick.com. Join us next time on Voice of the Word as we research the Scriptures, rescue persecuted Christians, and restore the Church to its Semitic roots.